Pardon the lighting. I know it's a bit dark, but a storm is about to hit, so I think it would be the perfect time to film this video. So I want to go with that ambiance. In my most recent video, I did an unboxing where I treated myself to a subscription box. And afterwards, like when I was going through everything, I was wondering what their process was like. I know they have things mass-produced, in order to make these subscription boxes. And that made me think one time back like in my personal witchy circle, where someone was mentioning how easier it is during these times to just go to a witchcraft or occult store and buy any of these items, for their spells, compared back to like in ancient times where things weren't mass produced and you couldn't go anywhere to buy anything and you had to make everything. And I was like, what? I know most people are aware that mass production existed in ancient times. We had blacksmiths, we had glass blowers. Bread and beer were also mass produced for sale, but also so were a bunch of magical items like curses. Hi, I'm Crystal the Cottage Witch, and today we're going to talk about some of the interesting ways magic and the occult were distributed in ancient times. So if you've seen any of my other videos, you may notice how the dots in these videos will connect to those other videos. I had said before that this is like a little workshop for like shaping a type of like bigger picture behind your practice, understanding the whys you're doing what you're doing. Each of my like bigger videos have been like a little stepping stone to fill in the blanks for the next video. If you're new here, hi, like I said, I'm Crystal the Cottage Witch. I'm a practicing witch and I study the occult, so this channel is a mixture of that, and I'm also a paranormal investigator, so there's like spooky and paranormal and psychology and history. There's a mismatch of all things like that related on this channel. Since I already have videos that are going to go more in depth to some of the things that I'm going to be referencing throughout this video, I'm going to link them up here somewhere. My thing is backwards, so I don't know which way it is. It's going to be up here and it's going to be in the description just in case you're not familiar with any of that, or maybe you missed a video, or if you're new here and you don't know what I'm talking about, they're going to be linked up here when I'm talking about it and then down in the description below, but absolutely no pressure to watch them. That's just to make your life maybe a little bit easier if you're not familiar with any of that. But I wasn't exaggerating when I say that curses were mass produced in ancient times. There's more that we're gonna talk about, but let's just start with like mass-produced curses. These were defixians. That kind of sounds like something that you would read like in an ancient book, like, doesn't it? It's not too far off technically, because that is their actual name and you could find these in historical texts. So, but from this point on, we'll refer to the defixions by their more common name, the curse tablets. So the curse tablets were made out of multiple different things, but the most common that we have found and what seemed to be used predominantly, the main one that seems to have been used is lead. Now, lead was used for both the mundane and the magical. The mundane being, it was so common to use like as a writing instrument, and it was just a common material, and it was useless to use for weapons on its own. And that brings us to magical reasons. With lead being so soft and like malleable, it can easily be manipulated. And through sympathetic magic, this stands for the target to be manipulated. Remember the term simpatica? Quick callback to the herbal astrology and the doctrine of signatures video. But with this being a useless material, it would be used for a useless person. Yeah, they kind of went a little bit hardcore with it. There are a chunk of these cursed tablets that reference this by saying, just as this lead is dull and worthless, so shall become blank, like name of the person. Lead also won't easily like dissolve. It won't like decompose easily, meaning that the curse would remain active. And you'll see examples of why that's important in a second. Lead is also connected to Saturn, the planet of karma as we know it, of discipline, of justice. I know I briefly mentioned it in my iron and witchcraft video that has like a whole bunch of spells, tips, and tricks. But they would most likely use an iron or a bronze stylus, to write on the lead. When the letters are being scratched, like into the lead, they're gonna be kind of like silver looking and reflective, kinda. It makes me personally think of kind of like that moon element, especially for like some of those like nightmare curses or with people to dream of other people. That's not historically mentioned, that's just what it makes me think of, especially like how back in ancient times, I have that mirror video. I don't know if I have enough space to tag all of these, but talking about how they would trap the moon in mirrors to reflect that energy, to save that energy. It just makes me think of that. There's no historical accuracy or documentation on that. That's just like, I think about that and I think it's kind of fun. These cursed tablets would also hold tag locks of the person, the intended target, the victim. They were covered in magical symbols, most of which, like the meanings of them, have been lost to time, but they would have been known by the magical practitioner that wrote them down. They also had the voices Mystica, I'm gonna put in the right name because I can't remember, which is the magical voices or the mystical words, which is the actual incantation of that spell. But the incantation was not the activation of the curse. They had to do something specifically with the curse tablets in order to activate the curse. More on that in a second though. A big chunk of these curses referenced Hermes Trismegistus. From the Emerald Tablet. Again, we also talked to him about in that Herbal Astrology and the Doctrine of Signatures video. But Hermes is referenced from his underworld aspect, not his average aspect of like medicine or messages or anything like that. This was just referencing specifically his underworld aspect of himself. Hermes also isn't like the only god that are referenced in these curse tablets, which is really interesting because we have Egyptian gods mixed in with some Mesopotamian gods. We have Jesus Christ. We have the Abrahamic god and even Persian gods. It's just kind of cool to see like a mix of different gods and goddesses to get different results in ancient times. Like, work with this god to get this result for this specific curse. Work with this god if you want this specific result from this specific curse. From Christianity to paganism. It's very like chaos magic even back then, and I love it so much. Now, I'm sure some of you guys are curious to what some of the curses on these curse tablets were. Some were pretty much of like what you think curses would be like. I have an example of a few. You want to hear them? Some of them are just woo! Alright, let's get into them. I have them written down, so I'm just going to look off screen as I read it. I curse Tetria Maria and her life and her mind and her memory and liver and lungs mixed up together, and her words, thoughts, and memory. Thus may she be unable to speak what things are concealed, nor be able. Or this one, that's for a thief who stole a ring. So long as someone, whether slave or free, keeps silent or knows anything about it, he may be accursed in his blood and eyes and every limb, and even have all of his intestines quite eaten away if he has stolen the ring or been privy to the theft. Yeah, there's that. There were some that were just some sick insults. Tacita is hereby accursed, is labeled old like putrid gore. Damn, I'm not easily offended, but I'm not gonna lie. I would have the air knocked out of me with an insult like that. Old like putrid gore. Damn. I'm gonna probably save that one in my book of insults. We'll do like one more before we move on to the more interesting ones. But like here's one more for a thief. Bicchus gives Mercury what has been lost, whether man or male may not urinate or defecate, nor speak, nor sleep, nor stay awake, nor well-being or health unless he brings it in the temple or Mercury, not gain consciousness of it unless with my intervention. So he basically wants whoever stole whatever from him to just be in a coma. Like, some of those are pretty intense. But we have this interesting one, which I feel like you guys might appreciate. May he who carried off Vilbia from me become liquid as the water. May she who so obscenely devoured her become dumb. Basically, he wants whoever who stole his girl to dissolve. Imagine that. Like, I don't want all this stuff to happen to you. I want you to dissolve. Like, it's kind of funny to me, I'm not gonna lie. And lastly, I'm gonna do this one for Socio, who is a Roman comedic actor, and it talks about a local mime. I went to clown college, I didn't go to mime college, but his name was Amopolis. Socio must never do better than the mime Amopolius. He must not be able to play the role of a married woman in a fit of drunkenness on a young horse. If you're wondering why that's so oddly specific, it's because that role was common in 2nd or 3rd century Rome. So basically, in other words, they don't want anyone to laugh at his jokes. There's also a chunk of them that are more like bindings and petitions to bind to these deities and these gods. They would be worded like, I bind Demetrius. I bind the head, the feet, the tongue of Demetrius. Before Hermes the restrainer, I bind the soul of Demetrius, the heart, the mind, the memory of Demetrius, the business, etc., etc. You know what I mean? Anyway, after the curse was written on the tablet would then be rolled up with any of the tag locks, stabbed through with a nail, fix the curse, and then disposed in certain locations. And these certain locations would be what would actually activate the spell. Now, currently, a big chunk of spell work has us burying a spell when the spell is complete. But that's not the case of the curse tablet. The Roman bathhouses are a perfect example. Most of them were written to Minerva, who is the Roman goddess of of justice. But they were thrown into the springs of the Roman bathhouses. They were thrown down the wells of the Roman bathhouses. The reason being is that in ancient times, people believed that the underworld was underground. So throwing it down a well was just basically like sending it in an elevator down there. You know what I mean? Like direct express mail, air mail. Terrible joke. These places were liminal space. They were also left in graveyards, also for this purpose, which we talked about certain aspects of that in my graveyard, cemetery, and dirt video. But sometimes they were left with specific corpses, and these would not be found in most cemeteries. They would seek out thieves and murderers because they would be buried in the outskirts. This is a callback to the ghost roads, to the corpse paths, which we talked about in the old earth magic, folklore, fairies, ghosts, ley lines video. But since these people were buried in a liminal space and not in sacred ground, their spirits, according to their beliefs, would be wandering and not directly in the underworld, so the spirit could take a message. You know what I mean? I didn't mean to go on a rant on curse tablets since we have some other things to talk about, but they're just so fascinating. Anyway, back to the point of this video. After analyzing these cursed tablets, historians and archaeologists discovered that chunks of these, found in the same place, were written by the same hand. The same person wrote a big chunk of these. And some other ones with blank spaces were found. Other ones would be found where the names would be written in a different language that didn't match the rest of the tablet. So you basically just filled in the blank with what you needed. How cool is that? Sorry if I'm kind of low energy. I'm on the verge of losing my voice, so I'm trying to talk in my customer service voice and very, very quiet and soothing. So I'm sorry if it's kind of boring. So if you're still here, thank you, because I don't know if I sound monotone or not. But it's believed that people who didn't go to a professional sorcerer would go to their temple precinct to buy a curse tablet. Isn't that wild? what would happen? Like, what would you do if, like, sorry, I'm thinking of a scenario right now. I'm going to ask you guys how you guys would handle this. All right, picture it. You're standing in line to get your curse tablet with, like, your neighbor, Thaddeus, all right? And you and Thaddeus can't stand each other. You guys both hate each other. You guys are always fighting, no matter what. You guys can never see eye to eye. And you go up nice and early and you get in line to buy your curse tablet. And you're standing there, you're looking around, you're looking at like the sheep and the goats roaming around and blase blase. And then you decide to look behind you in line, and a few people down, you see none other than Thaddeus staring daggers at you. Was Thaddeus an ancient? Yeah, that's an ancient name. But he's standing there just like staring at you like, what would happen in this scenario? Would they, like, try to cut each other, like, in line? And that way they could just, like, marathon sprint to, like, the liminal space that they're gonna, like, activate their curses? Or would, like, the person behind the other one, like, try to bribe, like, who they were buying the curse tablet from to be like, wait, what was their curse? Can I counteract their curse? Tell me what he cursed me with. Blah, 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 blah. I'll curse him with the same thing or something like that. Like, how would that work? And, like, vice versa. There's someone that, like, you've been fighting with and you can't stand, and you're like, you know what? I'm gonna get a curse tablet for them, because these are very common. And you're in line and stuff like that, and then you look, and then you see none other than Hercules in front of you, and he just turns around and he's just like, what would you do in that scenario? I don't know what I would do in that scenario. I'd probably just throw, like, dirt in them and then just run. I don't know. I don't know why I would do that, but I'd just be like, ah, and just, like, run away. Anyway, let's move on, and I promise that these ones are going to be quick. I know I mentioned it before. I can't remember what video I mentioned it in, so I can't link it. But incantation bowls were also mass produced, for sale. So, like, incantation bowls, if you're not familiar with them, they're just, like, regular, like, the fire clay bowls without any glaze, with, like, magical incantations written on them, normally spiraling from the inside out. Sometimes they would have depictions of what they were for or what they were protecting from in the bowl. Sometimes there was some writing on the outside of the bowl. But these bowls were buried upside down to trap what was ever coming up from the underworld. Because again, remember, in ancient times, they believed that the underworld was literally under our feet. Some of these were kind of like those like nestle dolls where they all fit inside of each other, and they were buried that way. Some were like bound up and tied up with like knots and everything else like that. And some had like eggs and eggshells in them. That way they could crush and they could be broken, and it could symbolize the evil spirit or the entity's soul or energy force being crushed and destroyed as it's trying to come up. So as the energy on them would break, just like the eggshell would break, or anything would be cracked like how the eggshell was cracked. Most of these were buried around homes or like underneath like your main threshold. And some, of course, were buried in cemeteries. And they also referenced Hermes. And they also referenced planetary influences as well. And incantation bowls, like the curse tablets, also had a mix of different gods mixed in. That was kind of redundant, you know what I mean? Such as Persian gods, Abrahamic gods, and other deities. Which is, again, really cool to point out. Most religions in of themselves have like a lot of structure, and it's kind of about that structure and that discipline, where magic is about results. I mean, that's why we do witchcraft, right? It works and it resonates. It's just really cool to see the mix of different beliefs way back in ancient times, from the magical sense, not from the religious aspect, because a lot of people just look at it from the religious aspect. It's just really cool. Anyway, these incantation bowls, my accent, oh my gosh, it's starting to come out. I'm talking loud. I'm not gonna have a voice tomorrow. These incantation bowls were pre-filled, so they were written already with like all their protection charms and blank spaces to fill in your information. They just took regular bowls from their potter and made them magical, and then sold them. What's also like really interesting about like the incantation bowls in particular is that a lot of them seem to hint at like the spoken word word of everything. So a lot of chunks, because again, a lot of these were made by the same hand with the handwriting and everything else for chunks of certain places, but things were written like how they would sound, like they were sounding out everything. So it kind of shows more of like a verbal education of like magic versus like a written education of magic, which is really cool. It's really fascinating to like think about that and imagine what those scenarios and just picture those scenes back then when you're learning about magic. You're not reading these ancient tombs, you're hearing it right from like the heart and the throat of the person speaking it to you, which still makes it cool, even though like, you know, there's misspellings on the incantation bowls for like a chunk of them from like the 7th century and stuff like that from this person, and then these ones have the same. It's still really cool. Doesn't matter if there was a typo when they were being mass produced, you know what I mean? It was just, I don't know, still really cool. What else was mass produced? Magical amulets. A lot of magical amulets were made through molds and block printing. The most famous one being like MS526336. I'm gonna find it and put a picture up right here because there's a lot of numbers. But that was an amulet mass-produced that we first had the evidence that things were mass-produced for magical purposes back in ancient times. It was done by block printing, I'm pretty sure, not a mold. Then we also have atomical votives, like little statues. They were mass-produced both for sympathetic magic, for magic working on that aspect, as well as devotional offerings to leave to your gods. You could buy these little statues and these little votives to leave as offerings if you weren't working magic with them. Rings were mass-produced, covered in magical symbols through molds. And they had all different characters and stuff on them. Crystal amulets were mass-produced, though obviously the stones would vary, but they would sell them again in bulk. I know I spent way more time on like the curse tablets than I meant to, and I could actually spend way longer. But so much of all of these things that I mentioned were part of their daily lives. And while it's not exactly the same as like us now, walking into like your local, you know, witchcraft and occult shop, ancient people in ancient times seem to buy more of their magical supplies versus making them by hand for certain time periods. No, it's not the case for every time period, but still, that's so cool and interesting to think about because we have the historical and archaeological finds to back this up for the receipts that like, yeah, no, you know how there's overconsumption now? There was like a form of it back then, which is crazy. With all that being said, however, I still personally really enjoy making my own things, and I still think you do not need 20 million things in order to be a magical practitioner. To be a decent witch, you don't need the tools and all like the trinkets, all the stones and whatnot. I have been practicing for over 28 years now, so I have a lot of stuff that I have collected throughout the years. So I do have a lot, but I started with nothing. And a lot of this actually has been, you know, given to me. This was a gift, this was a gift, this was a gift. This was from the dollar store. This one I bought. This was a gift. Candlestick was a gift. So like a lot of it has been given to me, and I'm very lucky with that. But I don't need all this to be a witch. You know what I mean? And neither do you. But it just kind of goes to show you that like the magical allure of buying trinkets and spell kits in a way, and just magical wares in general, have existed throughout time. And how common these magical type of practices were in people's everyday lives. Like I mentioned, the Roman bathhouses have so many of these tablets that they have found. I wonder if they like made a day of it back in like in ancient times. If they're like, oh, I'm gonna head up to the bathhouses today. Oh wait, I'm mad at Medea. I'm gonna stop at the temple real quick, buy a curse Medea, go up to the spring, dunk it into the spring, then take my bath, and then go home, and then go sleep. Like, do they plan it out? That sounded like such a Shaun of the Dead thing. I don't know, it's just very interesting to me. I'm not sure if any of you guys found this topic interesting, but like I said, it had popped in my head because all these magical wares that I mentioned were reasonably priced and easy accessible to all members of society and could also be easily traded for. So it's not like only the rich and the elite could have gotten these objects, which history shows us that. So cool to think about. Anyway, I really hope you found this interesting since it was such a random topic. I am filming in bulk again because as soon as I finish one video, I have to start filming and then editing the other video. It might be my narcissist spell video, which is going to be the weirdest spell that you ever do. But hopefully I could figure out a better editing program so I'm not just constantly editing my program because I can't exit out of it unless I reach a certain percentage that I'm done on my phone. So I'm constantly editing and then it keeps crashing. Then I have to start all over again. Oh! Anyway, I hope you're having a wonderful evening, night, day, afternoon, space-time dilation, whatever time it is that you may be watching this. And I really truly hope that good things happen to you. Bye!